Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 3 live stream for this week's Wells Fargo Championship. Going to break down the DFS and prop betting side of things for tomorrow to get you ready to go out there, fire on some exposure, go over a weather report, some ownership, some strategy for Showdown, which we have 2 sums this time. So it's not 3 sums in a 2-hour window. We have much more spread out tee times this time, which is going to give us a little bit of a weather edge to look at. So I'm excited for it. Going to cover all the details there. First off, welcome down into the live stream. We've got a little Crown and Coke in the cup, ready to get after it out here for Saturday, which should be a good one. I mean, today, right, we had to hit the gala. A lot of those top-end guys that were shooting 3-4 under par ended up being a profitable Showdown slate for yours truly. And I'm really surprised that nobody picks Sahith for the top scorer of the day, right? Was my top pick, right? My conviction play for the day. So maybe you guys felt a little bit lame taking him for that contest, but no one ended up winning the free month of the Patreon. So we're going to run back a contest to give you guys another chance at that. But all you had to do, right, was pick the guy that I told you was going to go off. So hopefully you're having a solid Saturday yourselves, or say Friday, and getting ready to go out there and crush it for Saturday. What's going on, Barry? You almost took down the $100 single entry. Well, hey, a close call and a big dollar single entry pays out quite well. So you love to see it, man. That's a great start to your week. And let's go out there and get a takedown this time, right? What's going on, Alex? 4th after 36 holes in the massive 50 cent with 73,000. So they're really big. 150 max out there. That's crazy. Yeah, can't wait to net $4 after they implode. It's a tough spot to be in, right? It's like leading after 32 holes as a player, right? Out there at a golf tournament, there's a lot of pressure, a lot of letdown that can happen. But hey, I'd rather be in 4th place or even in 1st place after 2 days than not cashing anything. So you're at a good spot. Yeah, I know you've got some sarcasm. Hey, they can keep it together, right? We'll see what happens. I've actually gone wire to wire in a GPP before. After day 1, I was leading a big $5 a few years ago, and I held that through all 4 rounds. So it is possible, and you can do that. Can I cancel your prop subscription? Michael, I've responded to you a few times, boss. You can switch from the prop to the DFS tier. You can message me on Patreon and I can help you, but the live chat, not really the place for it. So I'm going to skip by that. So let's go ahead, start off with our sponsor for this live stream, which of course is Ship It Nation. If you guys are looking for DFS analysis outside of what we touch on in golf here, Friday, different sports like NBA, MLB going on. We've got NHL, of course, in the docket over there. Pretty much every sport that you can imagine covered over there by the Ship It Nation crew. They are the best of the bunch when it comes to all of these sports. And really, if you're looking for an all-encompassing fantasy subscription, there's no better website to go to, right? They have proven winners for all these different sports. They put out written content, projections for every single sport as well. So you know that you're first off going to get a lot of perspective on the slate for any given sport out there, and you're going to have the data, the projections, the ownership to go out there and make actual lineups. So they make it real simple, right? They don't give you a bunch of extra fluff out there for all these different sports. And for example, tonight, right, I'm playing some NBA action. I'll be taking a look at some of the UFC MMA stuff out there for tomorrow night. So we'll have to check up on my MMA exposure when we get around to that. But hey, should be pretty solid over there with that Ship It Nation crew. So I'm excited to see what they're going to put together for their content on that side. But they, of course, are one of the sponsors of this live stream, of this content. And guys, you should definitely check out. But let's start it off with a look at the weather and give you guys an idea of what to expect. And like I mentioned, I think the main thing to focus on here is that we have a different tee time situation, right? These dropped about 10 minutes before we went live. And I had to change my entire player pool to kind of account for the setup, because if we're going to have guys teeing off at 7:45 a.m., if they're really going to start at the break of dawn, our last tee times are over there at 1:30 p.m. I mean, this is like a regular tour event, right? You got to remember, this is a no-cut event. So there's still 69 players making it to Saturday, right? Just like you'd have for a full, 65 and ties kind of event. So that's why the tee times are so spread out. And though the weather isn't crazy, right? It's not like we're going to be seeing a massive edge out there. Morning wave has next to no wind, which is pretty typical, right, for this time of year, this part of the country. Then the afternoon, it kicks up a little bit, right? You've seen that the first 2 days, right? It's been a little bit spicier in the PM hours than what we had for a lot of the mornings. And outside of a temperature increase, you can see super early, it's only about 51 degrees. Outside of that, all of the morning guys are going to get ideal conditions. So whether it's more receptive greens, more pristine greens because they're not all trampled on, also, right, lower winds as the day goes on, those guys that are teeing off at 8, maybe even 9, 10 a.m. are, I think, going to play a golf course that'll be a third, maybe even a half a shot easier than some of your later starters. Now, the equalization that's going to take place, right, the fact that you might not see a 0.3, 0.5 shot difference when it comes to the actual numbers tomorrow will be the talent gap difference, right? The guys at the top are your guys in form. It's Rory, it's Xander, right, coming in with scorching hot form themselves. The players that are just hitting the ball well over the first 2 days are some of your later tee times. So when we check in on the actual stat averages tomorrow, I would not be surprised to see it play pretty even. But when it comes to the actual conditions and ability to get to a ceiling performance, I do have to think that the morning guys will get an advantage, right? It's why we bet first round leaders in the morning. It's why most showdown slates, when we have nothing to work with, right, we just take the morning guys. And, you know, the win difference isn't massive, right? That's not why we're only stacking morning guys. It's the pristineness of the greens, the receptiveness that we mentioned before. All of that adds up, and even if it's only a tiny edge, right, for all of those different effects, when you have 3-4 things that are snowballing in one way versus the other, that's where you can see that kind of advantage. So with the weather, it's not a huge talking point. There's still going to be guys that I'm playing towards the middle to later half of tee times. But when your early guys are also lower owned, like what we have here for Showdown, it makes them pretty intriguing to mix into a few lineups. And of course, the reasoning for that, right, is your early starters are the guys further back. They're inherently going to get less ownership out there for DFS, right? Your casuals, even some of your more hardcore DFS players, right, love to tail the hot hand. And you're going to see a lot of that ownership concentrated on players that are playing better, right, that are up there in the top half of the leaderboard. So the result of that are that the early guys with, I think, the nuts conditions are going to be slightly lower owned, which is why we can normally take advantage of these kind of slates. So it's the first time all week that they're going off of two sums, right? That really changes the dynamic. And of course, you know, the weather's maybe not ideal, right? In an ideal world, right, we'd want these PM wins to be a little bit higher, but based on how they've been the first few days, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that it is a little bit spicier than what this model is calling for. So we'll have to see how it works out, right? You're always taking a gamble when you're playing a weather edge. I'm not going all in on the morning guys or anything, but I do like a few of those early starters for some leverage. So let me bring up the DFS projections. Let's go through that rather quickly. And then, of course, talk through our strategy out there for Showdown. So I have the Showdown sheet up now. We're going to talk through some plays. I'll give you an idea of some of the ownership and get ready to hop on in. Let's see, what do we got? You've got 292 point, 295. I'd have to double check my lineups, Phil. In fact, I'll check for you right now. So I'm assuming you went with like a single entry or something. Right, so you're sweating one single lineup. Let me see what my average caching lineup is right now. Now, my single entry is 262, right? And it's caching. So yeah, 292, you definitely have a chance, right? Let me see what my top GPP lineup. My top GPP lineup doesn't have you beat by very much. So yeah, you have a chance. I've got to say, right, you've got to get some luck over the weekend, but you definitely have a shot. Nice going with the 2s off 1. Agreed. It's about time, right? Slow down this golf tournament. Give the guys further back a little bit better chance to catch up. And that's the main thing for me, right? Is the reason why they set up tee times like that is to give the back end of the pack slightly better conditions. And we're finally going to see that. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I like the 2 sums and let's take something down, right? Didn't see the response. Yeah, dude, I replied to you multiple times. So check it out or message me on Patreon. And there's a way to do it. You might want to go on the app. It's probably easier to message me there. Better than the live stream, right? We're focusing on golf here. Phil says, why do you feel like Ann and Jaeger are going to go off? Jaeger kind of went off today. So I would say it's pretty far-fetched for him to do that 2 days in a row. But hey, Benny Ann could be that guy. Who knows? Maybe Griot shoots +3 for his best round in a month. Yeah, I'm not playing Griot, that's for sure. He's absolutely broken. So the guys that I like that are starting further back are legit players, right? It's not some slapdick like Emiliano Grillo. Right? If I'm going to take a shot on somebody, a Cantlay would make sense, right? A Wyndham Clark is a player that I'd point out. And it's not for, you know, just any sort of reason, right? It's not like you just go out there and play people at random. Wyndham Clark burnt edges on like every single hole. He was putting aggressively. He wasn't getting anything to drop. And even 10 to 12 footers, which he normally makes in his sleep, right? He was missing by 4 or 5 feet. So there's something going on with the putting. He's had by far his worst putting week all year. But one thing I know about Wyndham Clark, and, you know, I told myself making the player poll, he's one of the last guys that I added. I asked myself, am I a bitch? Am I somebody that's just going to take the hammer over the head twice with Wyndham and just stop playing the guy? And the answer is no, I'm not a bitch, right? I'm going to go out there. I'm going to take him for the third straight day. He won this damn event last year. He's one of the highest birdie percentage players in the world. He's one of the best players in terms of shots gained here in 2024. And the only reason that you'd avoid him if you were on him to start the week is if you're a bitch, right? If you're somebody that can't take losing for 2 days on Showdown on him. So I'm going right back to the well. Maybe I'm a dummy, right, for making the same mistake twice, but I also know that he's capable of nuking slates, shooting 8-9 under par, shooting nearly 59 out there at the Pebble Beach Pro-Am. He does it in hard conditions, right? And tomorrow, early on, when he's teeing off, it'll be next to no wind. He'll have receptive greens. You're teeing off earlier than what you had for the first 2 days. And moving day pin locations, likely going to be very scoreable on the par fives as opposed to not scoreable like you had today. That is going to be huge for a power player like Wyndham Clark. So if they move a tee box, right, on one of those drivable par fours, maybe they do it on 14, maybe they do it on hole number 8. All of that would make his projection even better than it already is. And you can see his projection here is at nearly 48 fantasy points, which I can tell you is up there with the Rory McIlroy and Xander. And the key aspect here that I think makes him an excellent play, right? Obviously, doesn't look like he has his best stuff, right? There's some risk involved with that because he's 9% owned, right? I've got Xander at 30% plus ownership. I've got Rory McIlroy at 25% plus ownership. And you've got to ask yourself, are these two guys 2.5, 3 times more likely to succeed than somebody like a Wyndham Clark? If the answer is yes, then play Rory, play Xander, right? But to me, that is a laughable no, right? That they're not 2.5, 3 times more likely to succeed. So there are no placement points with round 3 Showdown. Remind yourself of that. How players have played through the first 2 rounds is helpful, right? It's great to look at, but it is no guarantee of success out there for moving day. So there are going to have to be some of these nasty guys that you're taking that are starting early. And it doesn't always have to be your slapdicks at the bottom, right? Sometimes it can be the guy that you're starting lineups with out there with a Wyndham Clark. So you're getting low ownership. You know, if you liked him for main slate, if you liked him like I did heading into the week, you took it outright like I did, which of course looks terrible right now, then why wouldn't you play him at 9.2%? So that's what I meant, right? I wasn't trying to be that facetious when I was calling myself a bitch earlier, but it's true, right? If you truly liked him heading into the week, he's 9.2% owned. Ball striking is not even that far off. He hit quite a few good iron shots today. I think he lost slightly to the field because of some of his bigger mistakes, but had plenty of looks in that 10 to 15 foot range, had a few sub 10 footers that I think he made one of them. Actually, no, he had made no birdies today, right? So he didn't cash in on any of those looks from less than 10 feet. Just very uncharacteristic. So if you're looking for a safe play up top, right, that's not where you're going to get with Wyndham Clark, but you are going to get leverage. And if he ends up hitting, right, you're going to be sharing him with an absolute fraction of the field. Players like Max Homa are higher owned than I'm getting to, right? JT, right? Much more reasonable plays that are teeing off later on. But you have to have guys to offset some of that ownership. So you don't have to do it up top, right? If you're going to take all chalk up here in the 9-10K range, you could probably get away with that, right? So if your player pool was like a Rory Xander, you're mixing in like maybe a Morikawa, maybe one of these guys here, right? You're throwing in 2. If you're taking all these guys that are like 20, 30%, you can make that work as long as you're really differentiating down low, right? That 8K range, you better be taking at least somebody that's average ownership or lower, right? If not a pivot down there in the 8K range, 6, 7K range, no chalk for you, right? No guys that are 10, 15%. I'm not playing a lot of the chalk down there anyways, right? They're slapdicks for a reason, right? They're in the 7K range for a reason, right? They're not players that are going to be an optimal player all that often. So if they're going to be 10, 15% owned down there, like, no, thank you, right? I'm just not going to play them for round 3. But if you want to play guys like that, like, let's see, I'll give you a few ideas, right? Like J Day is real chalky, right? Like Steven Yeager is real chalky out there. Taylor Moore, super chalky out there for round 3 Showdown. You want to play any of those 3 players, you better be taking a pivot up top. So there are, pros and cons to taking players, right? There are, pushing and shoving that has to be done with your ownership, right? To finagle and lineup, right? To get the leverage that you're looking for. And, when you're taking a chalky guy up top or even a pivot up top, that has consequences on the rest of your build. So just know that, right? We're going to talk through some plays that I like here, but just know that ownership is probably the most important part of this. So a few chalky guys I'll take: JT, Max Homa. First off, Max Homa hitting the ball beautifully, lost 2 strokes with the putter, or else he would have went super low out there. He had already made a bunch of birdies, posted a really good fantasy score, but at -3, $9,700, and he's getting some ownership, but he's also not as chalky as a Morikawa, not as chalky as these top two players, right, that are both 25% plus ownership. It's reasonable enough that if you take 35-40% with Max, you're still going to be over the field right there. So I like him at $9,700. He's -3 at this stage. A player that I think is playing well enough to go out there and tail at ownership. And for me, if I'm going to take somebody that's -3 or better, right, 10-15% owned or plus, they have to be somebody that's doing it with the ball striking, right? They can't be luck sacking it with the putter. They can't be gaining 3-4 strokes around the green. It has to be a sustainable type of skill set. And based on what we've seen from Max Homa, the eye test and the stat test would say that. Same thing with JT. Today, could not buy a putt for his life, was pretty decent with the ball striking, was very solid around the green anytime that he missed greens. And outside of his last 3 holes where he went, I think, bogey, and then par on 18, the rest of his round was bogey free, right? A few birdies mixed in, and just, again, could not make a putt for his life. So the ball striking's there. Again, I think a very sustainable sort of player. And whether he just hits more to 4 or 5 feet, right, which would be almost automatic birdies for JT, or if he goes out there and makes a few more putts, both of those would be a way that he could shoot something like 3-4 under par. So I like the skill set there, right? I like the ball striking in particular with those two players, which is why I'll take them at like 17% ownership. Patrick Cantlay, on the other hand, just like Wyndham Clark, a slappy going off early, right? He slapped the ball around out here at Quail Hollow. Has not had his best stuff. Today, I had 3 putts galore. He actually had like 4 or 5 birdies on the day. And went out there and 3-putted 4 different holes. So I think a lot of people will look at Patrick Cantlay's scorecard, his score in general over the first 2 rounds, and think that he's playing a whole lot worse than he is, right? He had the top 3 finish out there at RBC. In general, is I think playing some of his best golf all of 2024. And if the only reason that he shot even par, well, actually, I think it was plus 1 that he ended up shooting today, was because he 3-putt, right? Went out there and just threw away a few holes, then I'll buy in on him, right? Outside of his water ball on hole 18, right? He had kept the ball striking in check all day, and that's much more what I'm worried about. So 10% ownership, right? 9% on Wyndham. They're the sort of players that you can take to get different up top. And if you're taking a Wyndham, feel free to take, a JT as your second man in, right? If you're starting Max Homa, right, maybe it's a good idea to take Patrick Cantlay to offset some ownership. Right? It's all about those checks and balances up top. Down here in the 8K range, there's not a bunch of chalk, actually. It's pretty spread out outside of maybe a Corey Connors, who's nearly 20%. Benny Anna have about 15-16% ownership too. But guys like Jordan Spieth, right, 13-14%. Cam Young, I guess, is getting some steam too. He's also somebody I would classify as chalky. But everyone else here, like Hovland, even Norton's relatively low owned. Siwoo, right, I don't think it's going to get that much attention. You can see Tony Finau here. I have it about 9.9%. This is a good range to get different to the field. So, if you're going to start with a chalkier start with maybe like a Rory or Xander Schauffele, there are a lot of options down here in the 8K range to get that leverage that you're looking for, right? So I mentioned, right, if you're going to take one of those, 25, 30%ers, that you're going to have to get different down here in the 8Ks, but you're going to have a bunch of options, right? So, low-end options, Matt Fitzpatrick, Jordan Spieth, right, Tony Finau, who I'm playing because of the ball striking, are all guys that you could take at sub 13, 14%. In the case of Finau, sub 10%. In the case of Fitz, sub 10% ownership too, out there in your lineups to offset some of the chalk that you've taken up top. So, I don't think you have to force in a pivot. Like, if you really wanted to play a Corey Connors or Benny Ann, right, as your second man in, I guess you can make that work. You'd probably want to spend more than $8,200 for your second man in. So maybe your third man in right down there with that sort of player. If you're going to do that, you just have to get different in the 7K range. Like at that point, there's no ifs, ands, or buts, right? If you're going to take chalk from 8K plus for those 2-3 spots, your last 3 have to be different, have to be pivots out there for at least 2 of the spots, if not all 3 out there for your lineups. So I guess let's talk through Tony Finau. Tony Finau, right, another player who the ball striking's been there like you'd expect, but just hasn't made anything of consequence, right? Anything from that like 8 to 10 foot range, anything from 10 to 15 feet, all of those have been bricked from Tony Finau. And he's the sort of player that will get hot in a hurry, right? He's not always the best putter, but like you see at some courses that he plays well, he'll go out there and find it, right? And go out there, gain 2-3 strokes in a round. So in the past, right, I've targeted him for a little bit of regression out there with the flat stick. And it's a little bit of a hidden hope sort of play, right? There's obviously a lot of unknown when it comes to that putting regression, but at 9.9% ownership, there's a time and place for taking a high upside Tony Finau. So it by no means that means that he's going to go out there and have an amazing day. But if you're telling me we're getting a sub 10% Tony, right, $8,600, I think is a very reasonable price tag out there. He's got the early, softer conditions, right, lower winds compared to the PM. All of that is a huge positive out there, $8,600. Down here at $8,000, we got Will Zalatoris, maybe a little bit chalkier at 13.5%. But it's not out of hand, right? It's not near 18, 20% like I have on a Corey Connors. It's not 15% plus like I have on a Benny Ann. It's, again, right, it's not low ownership, right, like you'd have with some other players in this range, but you're also getting what I think is a good price tag, right? $8,000, very fair on Will Zalatoris. It was $7,900 for the main slate, right? Obviously $100 more here. And I thought he was about $1,000 too cheap out there for the main slate. So out here for Showdown, right, he's probably still $800, $900 too cheap. So a player that's hitting the ball reasonably well, he's kind of hard to get a read on, right? We'll have these big spike rounds, right? API, right, in contention out there. First tournament back, what was it? I don't think it was the Amex. Maybe it was the week after that, right? He also got in contention. It's been a little bit hit or miss for Will, but when he's on his best stuff, it's a really high fantasy scoring round, right? So he has that ceiling round in him, and at 13.5%, I don't think it's too chalky out there for my player pool. A few guys in the 7K range I'll point out. So down here, I'm not really taking any chalk. In fact, the highest owned player that I'm playing is Sepp Straka, right? And he's 10.7%. Guys like Bazane Hoot are higher owned. Same thing with Steven Yeager. So for the most part, I'm looking to get different down here in the 7K range. And there are players like Straka, right, that I'm taking that are starting later. And then there are guys like Shank, right, that are teeing off earlier, right? A birdie or better upside guy, or somebody that can get hot with the irons. And what he does, usually Shank shoots low rounds. He's only 7.6%, but 7.6% on Shank, right? It's a pretty low number. 10.7% on Sepp Straka is not that bad, right? I've got Bazane Hoot at closer to 15%. I've got Steven Yeager, I think, at even higher ownership than that. So those sort of guys are going to have to pay the tax on. But, a 10.7% on Sepp Straka, I'll take that, right? And really the only reason he's not 15% is because he has guys sandwiched around him that are even better, right? Like you spend up 200, there's Jason Day, right? There's even Sam Burns who's playing pretty well, right? All there at the top end of the sevens. That's why I think he's getting squeezed in terms of the ownership a little bit. So a player that I'll mix into lineups. He's hitting the ball reasonably well and is also a pretty good Showdown scorer. A player with a higher ceiling than a lot of his peers. Down here in the sixes, I guess top end of that range, right? Jake Knapp at $7,000. Another guy going off early, right? +4 is not the score that you wanted, but he gets an earlier tee time because of that. So he's only 6% owned, a player that hits the ball a long way, which I think a moving day with some of the par fives playing easier, potentially a drivable par 4 or 2 is going to play into some of the power players' hands. And that's what you have there with Jake Knapp. And he's a good long iron player, which of course is important at Quail Hollow. You have Mackenzie Hughes, hometown player. So I know he's +2, but he's going to be grinding because he has a lot of his family and friends right at this event. So that's the one thing about hometown guys. Like they're not always the best play for main slate, right? Normally they start slow, but they'll grind for you, right? Because they have guys out there watching them, right? Following them around the golf course. They're not going to go out there and just lay over like a few of the other early starters might. Like you're going to have guys that might start like 1, maybe 2 over par tomorrow, right? That are starting at like +3, +4 that just stop giving a shit, right? Go out there, start slapping the ball around, right? Pulling a full Sibu, a full Keegan, if you want to call it that, out there from round 3. Mackenzie Hughes is not going to do that, right? Even if he is not playing well, even if he doesn't have his best stuff, you at least know he's going to stay engaged because of that fan aspect, right? Like it's intangible, but that's true, right? He's just not going to go out there and completely give up. So $6,500, I think a guy who has upside in general because of that putter. And if he gets hot with those irons, watch out, right? Could go out there and shoot something real low. Also like Adam Svensson, another Canadian, but mostly just love the long irons for Adam Svensson. One thing that I've noticed with some of the guys that are going off over the first few rounds is almost all of them are gaining like 3.5 strokes with the irons. So if anything, right, my popper's down low. I'm kind of looking for guys that can get hot with the irons, and that's what you have with Svenny, right? He has his weeks where he'll gain 6-7 strokes on approach, and that's when he's in contention. Now, we're in a Showdown sample where he's already kind of been sketchy the first few days. All we need him is to get hot for 18 holes, right? So hopefully he can do that on moving day. He's essentially unowned, right? 2.4%, and he's $6,200, right? So if you're going to be more aggressive with your 9-10K range, he opens up a lot of that salary for it. And The last play I'll go over here is a Showdown sweetheart for me, somebody I almost always play in Showdown because he is one of the best players when it comes to ceiling. And that's Peter Minotti, right? He has no floor. He is one of the more volatile, loose cannon sort of players that we have. But I have a rule. You play him when nobody else is, and you play him when he's going off early. He's going off early with the +3 score, and he's 0.7% owned. So I imagine a lot of that 0.7% are going to be people that are watching this live stream, but you're giving me somebody that won at my top comp course. If you haven't already seen my model for the week, right, number one comp course is the Innisbrook Copperhead course, and he won there a month ago, right? And that's a pretty long course, pretty demanding course off the tee. Not really what you'd think Peter Minotti would succeed on, but hey, he won a damn tour event there. So if he can do it there, he can certainly do it at this course for 18 holes. He's $6,000. He's, again, one of the players with a wider range of outcomes that has a really high ceiling. And at, 0.7%, you played him in 5% of your lineups or at 7% of your lineups. You have literally 10x leverage to the field right there. So I think is maybe worth a few shots if you need to take a pure punt down low. And it's not so much that you're getting Minotti in your lineup. It's what it buys you up top, right? If you wanted to go a Rory or a Xander and then take a Wyndham Clark as your second man in, I think that'll be a super unique lineup, by the way. If you started with one of those two and then took Wyndham as well at 10,600, the only way you're going to make that work, though, right, is if you punt way down low, right? You take a Minotti, you take an Adam Svensson to make that salary work. So I'm not playing this top two guys. I guess I'll just tip my hand on that. I'm not playing either one, right? Doesn't mean that you have to, or you have to avoid them, right? Obviously, that's just my choice out there for moving day. But if you wanted to take one of these two and then take another 9K guy, because I don't think a lot of people are going to do that, right? I think a lot of people are going to start with one of these two and then maybe squeeze in a Tommy Fleetwood, right? Probably start with like a Thagala or a JT. Like those will be the most popular second man in. If you go more aggressive about it, right, you spend like an extra $1,000, right? You spend an extra $1,400, right, to get up to a Wyndham Clark. First off, no one's going to do that. And I think there are players down low that you can make it work with. So that's what I'll say about the guys down low. It's not necessarily who you're getting at $6,000. It's who you're able to buy with that other spot because you punted so far down the board. Let's catch up on chat, see what's going on in terms of any questions. And then afterwards, we're going to go through some lineup construction and some prop stuff. Let's see. Where are we at? Exactly. We're not a bitch. That is exactly correct. Tom Kim went off today. He absolutely did. Xander isn't going to win. I don't know if I agree with that or not, but I think it's going to get a whole lot closer. Right? I think it's definitely going to at least get down to it on Sunday. So we'll have to see. How much randomness or uniques would I put into a large field? So I usually tinker around with it, right? It kind of depends, Adolfo. I usually do it just based on my player pool, right? I don't need to add randomness. If you're the sort of player that doesn't like exiting out players, right? Just likes to run projections and then get a set of 150 lineups, that's where randomness matters, right? If you're hand selecting, curating a player pool, and then going out there and building lineups with it, you don't necessarily need the randomness. I guess like if you're trying to force in different types of builds, then you could set it at like 25%. So if I just want to take my lineups and then jumble them up a little bit, right? Make sure that I'm not getting the same clusters of 3-4 players, I'll add in 25% randomness. But if you're not trying to do that, right? If you're just trying to diversify your projections, then I don't know if I'd run randomness. It's not always something I do. You're all in on Ann. Okay. You're just like Grillo. There you go. Grillo is crazy. What's up? What's going on, Jake? Sorry to be late. You're good. Hey, better late than never, Kevin. You're almost here for every single live stream, so you're excused. No worries at all. Who is your bounce back guy for tomorrow? So you're looking for somebody that spun their wheels. So we had Sahith yesterday, right? We nailed that one. He was my top play. Took him for that question. It's Wyndham Clark. And, just like I had a feeling about Sahith, right? He was, I think, playing better than the stats indicated. Wyndham Clark is the poster child for that. He is hitting the ball so much better than the scorecard indicates. He normally would have made a shit ton of putts by this point, right? He probably gained like 2-3 strokes right through the first 3 rounds. Just to get an idea, I'm not sure the exact number that he's lost, but I'll just double check real quick. It has not been very pretty. He's had some 3 putts. Most importantly, he's not making the scoreable putts, and he's lost 2.6 strokes to this point, right? So if we just reset the putter right back to where it probably should be, he's under par, right? And if he's under par at this stage, that's a top 25, right? Like, so he's not playing great, right? But he's also not playing horrible golf. So yeah, it's Wyndham Clark for me, man. And a lot of it is just he's playing better than the stats indicate. That's what we saw with Sahith, and you obviously saw it come back today. What do I think about Justin Rose? Ew. He had a much better day today with 6 birdies. I'll look at the stats, but that is a nasty one, huh? Justin Rose of all people, but we'll take a look, right? So he went under the radar. I didn't check anything up on his round. So that was most under the radar, right? -3 ever. He gained 3 strokes around the green. Yeah, no thank you. That is disgusting. Staying away from that at all costs. He lost strokes putting, which is like, okay, right? He lost on approach, yet he still shot -3, right? Because he gained nearly 3 strokes around the green. That just screams unsustainable, right? Just to give you an idea of a few players that kind of luck-sacked it, Jason Day gained over 2 strokes around the green. Taylor Pendrith gained 2 strokes himself. Those sort of performances are really, really hard to back up, right? Just like if you go to the shots gained putting section, Akshay Bhatia gained 3.15 strokes out there with the flat stick. That is really tough to go out there and back up. So, yeah, not my favorite play. Your boy Rose. Yeah, I got to say, I like playing them at like the Masters at low ownership, especially in like a showdown format. But I don't know if that Quail Hollow is the best spot, right? It's a big hitter's ballpark, and I'm not calling Rosie short, right? He's still got a little bit of distance, but he's definitely not the bomber we're looking for. So I'm going to bring up Draftkings. Let's build a lineup or two together, give you an idea of how I'm building for this slate. And then afterwards, talk through some props, which I hadn't had a look at the board before we went live. So that's gonna be a fun one over there. All right, but speaking of, actually, let me bring up the prop sheet while I remember it here real quick, because we got to take a look at that here in like 5 minutes. So I just want to do that before I forget. Here it is. Perfect. All right, let me share our screen. Let's build this lineup together. So what we're going to do is just build a GPP lineup, give you a little insight into what I'm thinking about when I'm putting together a build. And there's a few ways we could do this, right? I mentioned the fact that if you wanted to take like a Rory or Xander, if you double spend up, or let's say you went like Xander Schauffele and then Max Homa as your second man in. Now, I think if you went like Xander and then Wyndham Clark, almost no one's going to use that combination. But even if you go Xander then Max Homa, I think because you're being this aggressive about your salary, that you are going to get to a slightly different build than most people. So, what that kind of forces us to do is to go down here and punt a little bit. So maybe you do that with an Adam Svensson, right? You don't have to do it with Malnati, right? You can be a little bit less crazy about your pivot down low. Maybe you throw in like a Jake Knapp at $7,000, a Taylor Moore, like even if you wanted to throw in like a chalky Taylor Moore right here, right, you've got a sub 5% Svensson, you've got a sub, I think 6% Jake Knapp out there at $7,000. As long as our last man in here is some sort of a pivot, right? So a Benny Ann I would avoid. I'd probably avoid Sanjay too, who's getting quite a bit of ownership. But if we left this $100 on the table and took a Zalatoris, or even left the $200 on the table and went down here and took an Adam Scott, you could afford to take a Taylor Moore with some chalky guys up top like Homa and Schauffele. So it's all about who you're taking, right? It's about how you're building a lineup, not necessarily who you're taking, because like on the surface, you'd say like, oh, it's a chalky Xander Schauffele. Like you could never make that work, right? Same thing with like a Max Homa and a Taylor Moore. But because we have 3 mega low-owned guys, right? A couple sub 5%ers, right? Adam Scott, who I think I have at about 10% ownership himself, you can make that kind of thing work, right? Especially if you're leaving a little bit of salary on the table. So if you wanted to make sure you're unique, right? Really make sure that you're not going to duplicate, maybe you go down here and take Straka and then leave a whole $500 on the table, but you can make chalkier kind of builds work. What I prefer and what I'm doing, I'm going a little bit more contrarian about it, right? Kind of like I did for round 2, is to kind of avoid the chalk altogether, because I don't like constraining myself that much with ownership. And I kind of just like taking my guys, right? Building a player pool, especially for a round 2-3 showdown where we don't have placement points. It's great to have guys that are in form, but that does not guarantee that they're going to have success for moving day. And if I have somebody go off, I don't want to share them with a third of the field. So don't hate the lineup starting with Wyndham, right? And even going a double pivot up top, right? Maybe going Wyndham Clark. Maybe my second man in, we go down here and throw in, Tommy Fleetwood at pretty reasonable ownership himself. Down here in the 8K range, right? We keep it a little bit different with maybe a Jordan Spieth, right? He'd be low owned, right? You could throw in a Tommy, I'm just going to call him Tommy Finau, but yeah, Tony Finau, right? $8,600, right? This sort of lineup where we essentially have no chalk, you don't really have to think about your lineup construction all that much, right? You're just going to be so much different with the ownership, the game theory angle, that you don't have to worry about it. And based on what I'm seeing for Saturday, right, we got that little bit of a weather edge, which you're getting, right, by taking these chasers, but also just the game theory edge, right, of taking the lower owned players. That's what I prefer. So just to give you an idea of a few players, you can throw Tom Kim in there, right, 66, but I think it'll be pretty chalky at $6,600. So maybe we go a little bit less chalky about it, throwing like an Eckroat. Maybe it's Keegan Bradley that you want to play at that sort of price tag. This kind of lineup, you could play whoever the hell you wanted for your last man in, right? If I really wanted to play Taylor Moore, I could round out the lineup with them. That would be totally fine there, right? I'd probably rather take like a Kitayama, right, who's slightly lower owned and teeing off earlier. This kind of lineup has so much leverage to the field. I mean, it's probably even a little bit overboard when it comes to the leverage, but that's how I'm choosing to play for Saturday, that you don't really have to worry about it whatsoever. Like if I put together a player pool that's this contrarian, right, I really don't have to worry about lineup construction at all. So that's how I'm taking it for Saturday. My life's going to be pretty easy when building lineups. Again, just set my player pool in my optimizer, set my exposure caps on players, and then I'm good to go, right? I'll get my set of probably 60 lineups out there for Saturday. So we'll have to see the contest selection. I haven't actually reserved my entries yet, but speaking of, I got to do that as soon as I get off live stream here so that those things don't fill up. But that's it for the main GPP build. If you're going to take a more chalky approach, right, like I said, just have to pick a spot to get different, right? So if you're taking the chalk up top, differentiate in that 7-8K range, right? If you're trying to take chalk down there in that 7-8K, right? Maybe you take a Wyndham, right? Maybe that's where you go out there and mix in a Patrick Cantlay at $9,500. They have plenty of utility, right, for getting you that differentiation you're looking for. So a little bit of a weather edge, like we mentioned before, right? Slightly higher winds later on, a little bit of game theory, and that's how you can go out there and have yourself a DFS slate. So that's all I've got for the DFS side, guys. Still going to talk about props for the next maybe 30 minutes here. So live stream is far from over, but if you're just here for DFS, that is all I've got on that side. So any last second questions, feel free to go ahead and throw those down in chat. And of course, if you're hopping on out of here, all I ask is that you smash the like button before you do so and enter the free giveaway for the Patreon page. So just like yesterday, if you can get the top fantasy score out there for round 3, you can win a free month on my Patreon page. And do not make the same mistake as yesterday, right? I told you guys, Sahith, probably my favorite play. Guess who was the number 1 scorer? Sahith Theegala, right? Maybe somebody wants to go ahead and take Wyndham Clark this time. So go ahead, throw your guess down there in chat. As soon as a player is taken once, and a lot of people did not follow this rule last time and got disqualified for their entries, you can only take them once, right? So if somebody down there in chat claims that player is assigned to them, right? No one else can take that player. So even if you're watching this on replay, right, you've got to look at the live chat on the right? Make sure that somebody hasn't been taken already, and go out there and give me your top score of the day. So if you get that score, go out there and win a free month of the Patreon. And unfortunately, I can't win a free month on my own Patreon page. So I wasn't able to take advantage of that yesterday, but go ahead and let me know your take down below before you hop on out of here. Smash the like button, like I said, subscribe to the channel. You have to do both of those to be eligible to win this contest. And let's get ready for the rest of the weekend. So best of luck with your round 3 lineups if you're just here for DFS, and stay tuned for the round 4 live stream. But we are far from done here. So like I said, a lot of prop stuff I want to go through and some prop slips that I want to enter. Just to note with today I had probably the worst luck, I don't want to say ever, but because I've had some pretty unlucky slates before. Let me say that much. But I had one of my more unlucky slates ever. I had Cantlay, who was -3 through, I think, 14 holes today. Through 13 holes, he was -3. All I needed him to do for an entire slip to hit is shoot -1, right? So shoot +2 your last 5 holes, which includes a drivable par 4 and a par 5, and we hit, right? So I'm thinking, he birdies 14, 15, we're good, right? Because if he gets to -4, like that's a wrap, right? Well, he goes out there on the drivable par 4 and bogeys it, right? So that immediately puts him at -2. I go, okay, he birdies the par 5 next. He's okay still, right? He gets back to -3. That's cool. Par's that. Par 16. So I'm still feeling okay about it, right? He's I guess it was -2 at that point with a few holes left. He 3-putts 17, and then he goes out there and puts it in the water in 18. So that was a slip that didn't hit. JT, same thing, -2 through 15 holes. Has to play the last 3 holes +1, right? Which it's the hardest stretch on the golf course, that last stretch where all these guys choked. All he has to do is shoot +1, really not asking that much. And I hit a 6x slip. It's a big one too. It's not even a smaller slip that I'm hitting there. He shoots +2 his last 3 holes. I could go through like 2 or 3 other hole slips that didn't hit today. It was complete, utter bullshit. So the hit rate today was great. We hit 65% of our props, which normally I'd feel pretty good about, right? I mean, that's a really good hit rate out there in terms of hit rate. Do that long term, you're going to make a lot of money betting on prop sites, hitting at a 65% rate. But today actually lost a little bit of money. So that was absolutely tilting. If any of those slips hit, by the way, it's a profitable day. And there were like 4 or 5 of them where I had them miss by 1 or a hook or something like that. So just a lot of absolute bullshit. So let me get the complaining aside, right? I had to get that out there. We're not going to hopefully have that happen again, right? We go out there, we hit it at 65, 70% rate. It should be a pretty good day this time. I say should, right? Fingers crossed over here. Knock on wood as well, because that was complete and utter bullshit that we had today. With that being said, course conditions played to about an even par scoring average. So the pin locations on the par 5s were harder. That was actually one of the main slips I hit today. We're all overs on the par 5 strokes. But some of the other holes, like 17, were moved up with the tee box. Some of the other harder holes that were like 500 yards day 1 were moved up for day 2. So it did look like they were trying to make the golf course a little bit easier, right, with that incoming wind. And then the wind didn't really come through. So scoring average, didn't mean to do that, was actually a little bit better than we were expecting. So birdie average was 3.65 per round. Bogey average was 3.22 per round. Your fairway average and green average, though, were pretty much where we expected them to be. So not so much a surprise with those last 2 categories, but the real surprise for me, right, was the bogey average, right? I thought that'd be closer to like 3.5 per round, but because the pin locations, tee boxes were a little bit softer, also because the wind, right, wasn't as big of a factor, that's why we saw that out there. Now, I haven't been able to look at the tee boxes yet, the pin locations out there for Saturday, but let's see if they posted them. So yeah, it looks like we did get pin locations. Now, I can't do a full breakdown here, but anytime we're at moving day at this golf course, right, they typically make the pins really easy, right? So for example, 10's a par 5, it's a front pin, right? Hole 7 is the easiest pin location that you get at that par 5. Look at 15, it's another par 5. I'd say maybe not the easiest pin location that you can get. I'd say the day 1 pin for 15 was the easiest, or was there in that front right. But this middle left is also not all that tricky, right? It's a lot easier than the back right that you had today. If you look at 17, right, it's not as tucked near the water. 18 is the easiest pin that you can get by far. So it looks like they're setting this golf course up for a lot of movement, right? For a lot of birdies, potentially some bogeys like you always have at Quail Hollow, but it does look like they're going to try and up the birdies a little bit. So when we take a look at this average over here, right, coupling it with relatively low winds all day, I would imagine the birdie average is probably like 3.75 per round. So I would expect that to go up even a little bit compared to what we saw today. This bogey average, though, is going to be the bigger unknown, right? Now, if there's low winds, it probably stays closer to this 3.2 number, but with risk reward pins, which is what we get on moving day, right? There are some pins here that are on the surface pretty easy, but if you miss, right, you could go out there and really make a mess of a hole. I think the bogey average, it should go a little bit up, right? It should probably go up to like 3.3, maybe 3.35 per round, but might stay the same, right? Might stay closer to 3.25. So, I don't think we're going to see a lot of change when it comes to the scoring, right? I think the scoring average might get slightly better than what we had for the first few days. And something else to note is that, the first few days, right, they were teeing off at 11, right? It was noon over there on Monday. The morning starters tomorrow are going to be the only guys that have played this golf course in the morning all week, right? So we're going to have to see how that impacts the golf course, right? Maybe the temperatures, right, have an impact on some of the super early guys. But I could see the guys that are teeing off closer to like 9 a.m., right, when it warms up a little bit, maybe like 9:30 a.m. start times, really get after the golf course, right? Because they're going to have no wind. I mean, look at this forecast. I mean, like literally no wind early. And they're going to have receptive greens, even more receptive than the first few days, because they're going off earlier. That feels like a pretty good recipe for some low scores. So when we take a look at the tee times here, I'll give you an idea of some of those players. The ones that are going off of what I think are the best conditions would be Cantlay's at 9. You have Tony Finau there, right? A lot of guys that we talked about, right? Mackenzie Hughes, a player that I'm getting to. Victor Hovland is in that same sort of tee time wave. Tom Hoagie, early tee time, but late enough to where it's warming up a little bit. Adam Scott's there. You can see Svensson, right? Another player that we talked about. These tee times for props are, I think, the perfect conditions, right? If you're looking for, overs on birdies or unders on strokes, these would be the players that I would look for the most. And the added benefit too with props are that these players haven't played well the first few days and that their lines are going to be softer, right? Guys that have played really well the first few rounds are going to have juiced lines, right? Like Xander's at like 68 strokes, right? It was an entire 3 under par at this golf course. Like that's going to be a tough guy to want to take an under on. But like Tony Finau, I imagine guys like Hovland for sure, right? He's going to have a juice line when it comes to strokes. Might be worth looking at because they're in this perfect window of tee time. So that's what I'll say about the props in general, right? Course conditions in general is that I think you're going to see a little bit more birdies out there, and that the morning guys, right, especially, you know, like mid-morning, right, 9, 10 a.m., or I think the guys that you really want to keep an eye out for. So again, if you're trying to get the highest score of the slate, this is probably the section to look at, right? Like if you're looking for a true ceiling round, go out there, shoot like 6, 7 under par. The guys in the nutted conditions are the best chance to do so. So that's what I would do. Let's see. Where we at? Somebody took Clark right away. There you go. That's what I'm saying. Somebody finally took the smart play. So Cam Young got off the board. I like that one. Jordan taking my boy. I like that. Top scorer, Sam Burns. He can go super nuclear. Same thing with Adam Schenk. So that's what, 5 players off the board. If you want to get one of those top tier guys, better rush to the window and get your pick in now. So if you're watching this on replay, all of those guys have been taken. And just so that everyone knows, it is Clark, Cam Young, Jordan, Burns, and Schenk. All of them are no longer able to be taken for that contest. And to enter yourself, if you're just joining us, if you want a free month on my Patreon page, just get the top fantasy scorer for tomorrow. So any player in the field that hasn't been taken yet is eligible for that. So let's get into this thing. So in terms of prop boards, we're going to start with this. And look at this, guys. I mean, I'll just show you the slips. I mean, look how tilting this is. So Cantlay, right, shoots 72 strokes. We already told you about how he choked, right? JT, right, we had a whole 3-man slip here that would have hit for $550. Goes out there and chokes his last 3 holes. Corey Connors slipped from the live stream yesterday, right? Sahith did his thing, shot 65. That was great. Corey Connors had 1 birdie through 12 holes. Makes 4 his last 6 holes. So it was just tough scene. We had that one hit at least. Tyrese Halliburton went over this prop in like 2 quarters. Oh boy. Hey, good thing I'm on NBA towel, that's for sure. But hopefully the CSGO one comes through for me. But yeah, the PGA stuff today was absolutely just heartbreaking. I mean, even Jordan choking, right, going over that 70.5 line was just like, I don't know, an absolute meme at a certain point. At a certain point, you just got to roll your eyes and go, okay, it's going to be one of those days. Let's not do that this time around. So let's go over here to PGA. Let's try and bounce back a little bit there because close but no cigar is great in horseshoes and hand grenades, but not so much when you're going out there and playing PGA props. Let's see. So we have a prop board on both sites, which is great. So we're going to have those to compare to. A lot of times, right, we only have Underdog, so it's good that both sites are posted. Got 4.5 birdies, like even on a Cantlay is kind of crazy. Oh wow, they're juicing up these boards in anticipation of moving day. I was kind of hoping that they wouldn't. I was kind of hoping that they'd post similar lines and that we'd go out there and just like juice a bunch of overs on birdies, maybe unders on strokes. And yeah, they definitely adjusted for it. So they're not dumb. You know, I like to rag on them a little bit when it comes to what they do, but they're not stupid. They're not completely helpless when it comes to going out there, putting out projections. The only guys you have at 3.5 birdies here are some of the like lower tier guys. So that'd be like Corey Connors, Kirk, somebody like Brian Harmon. They also have it 3.5 birdies. Those are probably decent spots, right? Especially if you can find somebody that's hitting the ball well over the first few days. The only issue I have is that there's not more options, right? The guys that you'd hope to target are pretty much all juiced up. And I have a few in mind that I kind of know I want to target already, right? Even without looking at lines. So I guess let's just look at those. So I mentioned Wyndham Clark, right? Being one of my favorite plays. I don't necessarily hate the idea of taking it over at 4 birdies. Like he had 0 birdies today, right? So you're gonna have to look past, right? The 0 birdies. So maybe that's an option. And then I thought this was 13.5 par 5 strokes. If that was 13.5 and he was juiced under, I was going to absolutely take that. But maybe let's take this Wyndham Clark prop. That's at least one of the guys I wanted to look at. Let's see, Matt Fitzpatrick at 3.5. That seems a little low. Let's see. Hopefully I plugged my mic back in. I had a slight technical malfunction, but it looks like we're good to go now. Yeah, that just happened. It happens a lot here. So if it's your first time seeing that, we've been doing pretty good lately. So yeah, hopefully you can hear me now. See, strokes and underdog look good for unders. Yeah, honestly, I wasn't looking at those at first, but let's take a look, huh? So Wyndham, I know they had 70. What is he at in prize picks? Is that 69 and a half? Yeah, you're right. This strokes board on underdog is a lot higher than what we have on prize picks, huh? So for birdies, like there's a lot of push equity there. Obviously, there's some push equity at 70 strokes. The argument for wanting to take some strokes lines out here for moving day would be eagles, right? Would be if they move up the tee box. Would be if those par fives are so much more scoreable than they were the day before, which again, looking at these pin locations, like seven's real gettable, right? At 10, you could potentially see some eagles at because it's that front pin. Even a hole like 15, I think is maybe slightly more gettable. Is maybe you get an eagle from somebody like a Wyndham Clark. So yeah, I like that. Good call on that, by the way, Swope. So 70 and a half for Fitz. That's kind of where he was today. Right. So I was complaining that this board rate was priced a little bit worse than what we had for round two, but not on everyone, right? Obviously, the guys that played well have all been juiced down, but not everyone has had that same treatment. So let me just go through here and eyeball a few more props. These are the main three I'm eyeing right now, at least. And I'm assuming that Xander got bumped up, right? Because 68 strokes is crazy. Yeah, he's at 69 strokes on prize picks. Like 68 strokes is just like going a little bit overboard, huh? So let's see. Did they bump that one or did they just take it off the board? They might have just taken it off. So yeah, they just took that one off the board there. If they post him back at that same number, maybe we fade him out there for a prop slip. But just to kind of circle back to these averages, green and regulation is 10.8, fairways are 8.6. So we can always try and find a few more leans there too. So they have Xander at 13 greens. Like if we're not going to fade his strokes, maybe you fade him for an under greens of regulation. Let's see. Jordan is at, they don't have one up for him. Let's see if there's any other fades for greens that we can take. And just, I guess, players that would be good fades for greens regulation. Like I know he doesn't even have a lineup, so can't even look at that one. Let's see, does Chris Kirk have one? Nope. Let's refresh this. Maybe they're just posting them, and that's why I'm not seeing them yet. Or do they just not have them up for everyone? Maybe that's the case. There's only a few guys that they're posting green and regulation props for. Let's see. Jordan did not have one. That's right. Sahith does, but it's at 11.5. Victor's at 11.5. Same thing with Cantlay. Okay. I'm looking for something like 12 or 13 to take a fade on. So 12.5 on Morikawa. I mean, he's a pretty good green player, though. So I don't know if I love that. I'm trying to find like an average green and regulation guy. Like Jason Day would have been like the perfect example. Like if we could have found him at 13 greens, like I would definitely fade that. Let me see what he's at for strokes. So he's at, does he even have, 70 strokes over here on prize picks. So there is a 0.5 discrepancy. Let me see if they're going to post that Xander strokes back. Because ideally, I kind of want to take that. Freaking 68 strokes. Like, what are we doing? He's the leader of the golf tournament, too. Like, he's going to be under immense pressure out there. So there's even more value to that than just the line. Let's see, what else can we do? So we could just enter this, but the payout's not ideal, right? If we can find another fade, so like if it was an overs on strokes, maybe an under on birdies or whatever, we can end up getting a pretty normal payout on a 5-man slip. So let's see what we can do here. unplugged again. Great. So I think I was muted for what, like 2 minutes there, something like that. So, hey, if you stuck around, even with me just talking to myself, that's great. But it's still cut in for a second. Yeah. So I don't know what you guys heard or what you didn't hear, but this is the slip that we're going to go with, right? So Clark, he's at 69.5 on Prize Picks. So essentially, I took Fitzpatrick out. Maybe it cut out before I said that. 1 second here. My throat's getting me now. Crown and Coke will wash away that. My throat's just like, it doesn't feel great, but there we go. So Wyndham Clark at 70 strokes, right? He's at 69.5. So I took him with the discrepancy. I took Matty Fitz out because he's at the same number on both sites. So maybe I still end up playing it. I'm going to have to take a look at DraftKings and FanDuel, see where they have their odds before I fire on that. But we know we're getting some sort of line value with Clark. Tony Finau's at 4 birdies over there in Prize Picks. And then this Xander prop, you guys probably saw the stats. I knew it probably cut out while I was talking a little bit about Xander Schauffele, but he's leading by 4 strokes. I mean, he's boat racing the field, right? And he only went over once, right? He had 15 today. Good for him, right? Really good round today. But day one, right, he still went super low that day, right? And only hit 13 greens, right? So that would be a push on this sort of line. And he's leading the event by 4 strokes, right? So obviously, you'd expect him to come down to earth at some stage. And even hitting 12 greens, 11 greens would be an above average day, right? Would still be a pretty good iron round, let alone if he has a little bit of a letdown out there. So he's teeing off later. He's got the highest wins, probably the most firm greens too. And good. You can hear me. Apologize for that. It happens from time to time. Usually when I'm on the road and I'm dealing with a little bit of a sketchy setup, but maybe we have to get a new cord for the home setup because it seems like it's going out here as well. I'm not sure if you heard me talking about Tommy Ladd before, but 3.5 birdies is, in my opinion, too low for anyone I would consider a borderline elite tier player. And Tommy Ladd, right, he's not quite the same sort of player as like Xander, right, a Rory, a Patrick Cantlay, but they've gotten him an entire birdie lower, right, than some of these top tier players. So I think that's probably a pretty decent look. And what I want to look at here is I want to see if FanDuel posted a board and also DraftKings. So DraftKings, I'm loading that. Let me bring up FanDuel here as well, because FanDuel will have birdie lines most of the time. And I guess we can check on Caesars too. They've been posting some birdies lines too. So we are shit out of luck on DraftKings. Nothing posted there yet. Let's check on the Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo on FanDuel, we do have stuff. Let me check Caesars now. Here, I'll share my screen so you guys can see this. All right, so they do have round score stuff posted, which they always do, so that's not such a surprise. I want to see if they have birdie stuff up. So they have pars up. They do have number of birdie props up. So this is what we want to look at here, right? So they've got Hovland at 4.5 and minus 185 under. So if we can get him for 4.5, which I think he was at 4.5 on, I'm not sure if it was Prize Picks. Yeah, he is there in Prize Picks. Like that's, in theory, right, a pretty solid prop to take, right? Especially if you're taking those odds seriously. Now, why did that go away? Oh my God. The UI on this is worse than the Underdog UI, and that's saying something. Jesus. All right. Let's see. So there was Hovland there. Sanjay's at 3.5 and juiced over. They have Morikawa juiced minus 180 over, but of course, right, he's at a higher number on books. Cantlay is a minus 180 under at 4.5. Tommy Fleetwood's, look at this, minus 155 over. So yeah, if we wanted to make this a slip, we could do that right there. But let's see what else we've got here. So Max Homa's juiced way under. Wyndham Clark, of course, is juiced under. I mean, everyone should be, right? That's at 4.5 birdies. But the guys at 3.5 here, right? Matty Fitz, 3.5, he's minus 165. Look at this. Tony Finau, right? He's minus 170, right? And we got that over there in Underdog. That seems like pretty sweet value to lock in there. So I'm pretty happy with what we've gone already. You can see Rory is closer to even money out there at 4.5. And then I guess that's about it for the ones that are notable. Let me see if they have anything over here on FanDuel. So it looks like it's just round scores, which speaking of, I guess let's bring that up over here on Caesars too. I want to see where they have Wyndham Clark, right? So Wyndham Clark, he's at 69.5 and he's juiced over. So, okay, that's pretty expected, I guess. So 69.5 and slightly juiced over. Yeah, give you that push equity at 70. Of course, a little bit of a bounce back. Still totally fine with that line. But what I want to look at here are like Matt Fitzpatrick, where he's slightly juiced under. What do we have him at over here? He's minus 120. So, yeah, that's a pretty fair line, I would say. Right, that line on sportsbooks, DFS apps is pretty appropriate, I'd say. Tony Finau is juiced minus 140 under. You've got Xander, right? He's an entire stroke and a half higher. And speaking of, let's see if they reposted that over here in Underdog, that strokes line. So they did. They bumped it up 0.5. I kind of like this under on greens even more than the strokes line. So I feel pretty good about this under in 13. If it was at 68 still, right, without the 0.5, I probably would have faded that over the green regulation line, but that obviously got moved. So look at that. They already put a 0.9x on Tony. Those bastards already out here moving shit. But yeah, let's do this over here in Prize Picks. So 4.5 is too high for just about anyone. Like maybe you put Rory there, even like a Schauffele, I think that's too high. Now, I'm kind of hesitant to fade Hovland because anything's possible with these players. But Hovland has looked like he's like quote unquote broken right now. As soon as I fade him out there for a prop slip, I'll probably go out there and figure it out. But in theory, this is a really good slip to enter. So you've got the minus 180 on Victor Hovland when it comes to the odds. You've got the minus 170 I think it's minus 155 for the over there in Tommy Fleetwood. So both would be considered plus EV leans if that's the kind of thing that you're looking at. And you're getting the full 3x payout over here on Prize Picks. So that would be the main slip that we're going to take on Prize Picks. But I want to see if you have anything else to go with. So you can see, right, they have Xander at 12.5. So that's line value, right, compared to what we got. So we feel pretty good about that. Right, we got the 0.5 discrepancy. And then let's see what we've got here. Not many options when it comes to the fairways hit. And let's circle through this board a little bit more because, again, we focused a little bit more on Underdog to start. Now I want to look through some of this Prize Pick stuff. Is Xander versus Hovland free? No, it's not. That's why I said that this Hovland under on birdies wasn't free, right? Because he could go out there tomorrow and find his game, right? I mean, if Victor Hovland finds his game, he blows away 4.5 birdies. I mean, he's arguably the best birdie maker in the world, right? When he has his best stuff, he's an elite tier iron player and he's a really, really good putter, right? So now he's really far from that, right? That's why I faded him for under 4.5. But is that matchup free? Absolutely not, right? Xander has a lot more to lose on these other top tier players, right? He's got a 4-shot lead, right? So a player like him does not have to be as aggressive as the other guys around him, and he could still continue to be 3-4 shots ahead. So no, it's not free. But do I think it's a good prop? Probably. Yeah, I think it is, right? Because I think Victor Hovland doesn't have his best stuff. Xander Schauffele clearly does, but it's far from free. And the reason why they'll match up those two players, right, is Hovland, though he's playing worse, is going to be more aggressive, right? So Prize Picks knows that, sure, the form favors Xander Schauffele, but the mental side of it, right, the actual aggressiveness is going to favor Victor Hovland, right, which kind of makes up for that gap a little bit. So is it free? No. Is it a good prop? Probably. All right, let's see a few other things that we can do here. So I kind of wanted to look at some unders on birdies at 4.5, but it doesn't look like you have a ton of them at 4.5. Like they have a few guys at that number, but not a ton. So I would consider Cantlay at 4.5, but I guess I prefer Hovland because he's playing a little bit worse. If we go over here to the stroke side, these are a little bit lower than what we have in Underdog, which kind of speaking of, I think some of the best value that we have might be on the Underdog side. So I know we already have a slip in here, so maybe we do just circle back to Underdog and see what we can do with those strokes lines. So I was eyeing up the Matty Fitz one before, but let me see, like Rory McIlroy at 68 strokes. Like that's too high. Like I hate to say it, right? He's 69.5 strokes, right? In these other sports books. On FanDuel, right? He's at 69.5, right? And slightly juiced under. Like I don't think he's drastically mispriced because, again, it's moving day. I think he's going to have a pretty solid round, but this is still very aggressive. So I'm not sure if I'm actually going to fade Rory. Like maybe it's a better fade to take him for under greens, right? Just hope that he's, out of position a little bit more. But these elite tier guys, these guys that are in contention, their props are just juiced beyond belief, right? Like these bottom tier guys, like the Tony Finau prop that we got, like that was very fair. These top tier players, it's ridiculous. They've gone way over the deep end when it comes to these projections. So I was looking at the JT prop there. It's at the same across both sites. Let's look at Sahith. He's probably at the same number, I'd imagine. Actually, 0.5 higher over there on Prize Picks. So that's a good data point to know. Let's look at Jordan. It's probably 70 across both, I would imagine. Does he even have a line, Jordan? Yeah, he's at 70.5 actually over here on Prize Picks. So there are some guys on Prize Picks that actually have favorable numbers. So it's not like 1-to-1, right? You've got some guys on Underdog that are way too low. It looks like you have some guys on Prize Picks that are probably way too low as well. So just based on what I don't know if I can trust Jordan for props, so maybe I shouldn't look at that. The Jordan stan in me wants to click that. Absolutely does. Like it honestly wants me to click this Thigala prop too, but we're probably going to stay away from that for now. Maybe the Patreon members later on will end up getting that first slip. But let's go through something over here in Underdog first. I want to refresh this, see if any bumps came through, which looked like a few were. So Sanjay's at 70. I'll stay away from that. Considering JT, but if he was at 70, I'd be all over that. Let's see. You've got Hovland at 4.5. So speaking of, right, I know we didn't have a bunch of 4.5s on Prize Picks. We do have a bunch over here on Underdog. So, we should definitely take a look at these. So Sanjay 4.5, definitely too high. Hovland, maybe we don't double dip, right? Maybe we try and spread out our exposure a little bit, not to go too overboard on the same guys, but they should not have everyone at 4.5 birdies. Like 3.5 for an over, that's pretty reasonable if we find the right player. But these makes it tough to want to fade these, like a ton of guys. But these are definitely too high. All right, just to do the comparison, right? Did they have their props? Did they have them up for birdies? I can't remember with those two. Too many data points. So yeah, they had Sanjay at 3.5, right? And he was minus 140 over. Did they have Jason Day up? They did, right? He's also only at 3.5. Okay, so let's take those two. Those are going to be props. I want to add one supportive play, right? To go out there and get a slightly better payout to kind of juice this up a little bit. So let's find an over 3.5 or an under on strokes. So Tommy Fleetwood, if he was at 3.5, maybe I'd take that. Matt Fitzpatrick at 3.5 birdies. So I know we were looking at the stroke stuff before, but what is his birdie line at? So he's minus 165 over. Count me in. We'll take this. So what we're doing here, right, is we're getting an added benefit with the tee times too. So Jason Day, Sanjay, right, are up there towards the top end of the board. So they're going to have the harder set of tee times, right? They're going to have higher winds, probably less receptive greens. Matt Fitzpatrick with an early tee time, we're getting the better projection and better conditions. So I kind of like what we're doing here where we're anti-correlating it to get the higher payout, but it makes sense when you think about the tee times, right? The later guys maybe having a harder go about it, and we just need Matt Fitzpatrick to make some putts. So that'll be another 3-man that we go with. And speaking of, I kind of want to mix in an under on Cantlay because, like, what was his line for birdies? Wasn't it like crazy? Yeah, it's minus 180 under. Like, okay, like I'll bite. Like, sure. The question is who do we pair him with, right? To go out there and get like a decent payout. We could take a fairway line. I was looking at this earlier, but it's like, who would you take? Essentially, they've got guys at 2.5 bogeys. That feels appropriate for some of their like top tier guys. Let's see, 3.5 for guys like a Nat Pendrith. Like that also makes quite a bit of sense. I'm trying to find some sort of supportive stance to take on a guy to go out there and get a 3x payout here. So let's see. Pick 6 has Rory at 67.5. Whew. Yeah, let's look at pick 6, by the way, Kyle. Thanks for the reminder. I think 67.5 is a pretty good fade. Like 68, like I would fade that, but 67.5 is like almost like you have to fade him at that point. Top scorer, Taylor Pendrith. I love it, Chris. That's a bold take and somebody that could definitely do it. So best of luck out there to you. So let's see what we're going to do. So we've got Cantlay under. Oh, these guys at like 10, 9.5. No, thank you. Like I'm just not going to do that. I was looking at Matty Fitz, but he's not always the most accurate driver. Like he's been spraying it a little bit lately. So I don't know if I trust him for that kind of prop. We could look for an under on strokes. Oh, am I really going to play Spieth? That's It's so disgusting. I hate doing that for props because, I'm extremely biased towards Jordan Spieth, but he's playing well. The issue with Jordan is the injury. He's got a legit wrist injury. So for the sake of everyone watching, we're not going to take him. But if it weren't for the injury, you bet my ass I would be playing Jordan Spieth because he's playing really good golf this week, which he hadn't been for a while, right? So we hadn't really been able to say that for like the last 3-4 weeks. He finally looks good, but now he finally is dealing with a legit injury, which if you didn't watch today, he had complained about it like 6 times during the round. And then I think it was one of his last 5 holes, he hit a shot, looked over at his caddy, and it was looking like he was going to withdraw. Now he played through it, ended up kind of tanking towards the end of his round. You've got to wonder if that was caused by the injury. So, yeah, I would avoid him. I don't know what I was thinking, say I was going to play that. Maybe we take the Sahith Theegala one, though. So just to do some line shopping there, I want to see where they have him for a strokes line. And they might not have him up, which is the unfortunate part. So, yeah, they definitely don't have him up over there on FanDuel. So let's see if they have him up here on Caesars, which they probably don't, honestly. Yeah, so they don't have him up. So if we're going to find a comp for him, like he's better than Tony Finau, and Tony Finau's juiced under. So 70 strokes is a pretty fair projection, I would say, out there on Sahith. But kind of like Wyndham Clark, like he's probably a solid under. So we're going to stay away from the Sahith prop. Let's find something better. Could go an elite tier guy at 69.5, but I'd prefer them to be at 70. Could go mid-tier guy at 70.5 too, but it'd have to be somebody in form. And a lot of these guys on here aren't in form. A lot of guys are kind of struggling this week, so it makes them tough to want to take for a strokes prop. The other thing we could look for is an early tee time, right? Somebody like Tony Finau that's teeing off at like 9 a.m. That's kind of what we have with Cantlay, but again, this projection is just too high. Ugh. Let's see. Any suggestions down there in live chat? Yeah, let's go. Yeah, best of luck out there with that, dude. Pendrith, I like when people take like Pendrith as opposed to like Rory, Xander, right, out there in this contest, because sure, like you can maximize the EV of the contest, or you can have some fun about it, right? Try and go out there and take a real winner. So I like that, man. Let's figure this thing out. So I really want to play this Cantlay under. It's just we got to find the right sort of pairing for it. And based on the odds over there on FanDuel, over there, I should say on Caesars, maybe an over on birdies isn't the worst idea. So just looking at the guys they have at 3.5, my instant reaction would be somebody like a Scott, maybe an Akshay, maybe even a Nick Dunlop at 3.5 birdies because he's an extremely aggressive player. Now, I want them to be teeing off early, so let's take Dunlap out, right? He's the latest tee time. So we're looking at Adam Scott and Akshay here. Akshay's got a 9:30 tee time, which it's pretty close to ideal right there. And then Adam Scott has a 10:45 a.m. tee time. So that's a little bit later, but it's not too late to where it's a bad tee time. Let's see how they played today. Just look at their live stats. So I know Adam Scott's near even par. He lost on approach, gained off the tee, and lost with the putter. And how many birdies did he make? He made 2 out there today. The other option would be Akshay Bhatia, and who I know played really well today, but he did a lot of that with the flat stick. So where's Akshay? So Akshay ended up at +2 by the end of the day. He made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 birdies, but it was all carried by the flat stick. Take Akshay out because I kind of worry about that putter. So I guess it's Adam Scott or a strokes line because I don't want to take an over at 4 birdies. I'd rather take the strokes line at that stage and go out there and do that. Okay, let's look at strokes. Could go Sahith. It's not my favorite prop. It's not the worst prop. Matty Fitz is probably a safer guy at 70.5 that we could take. Heck, like even a Siwoo Kim, I wouldn't really hate for taking an under at 70.5. The issue is that I wish you were getting a slightly better player, like somebody that is truly an elite tier guy. Like Siwoo plays like an elite tier guy sometimes, but he's not truly in that, top 20, right? Always on the PGA Tour. So it makes him slightly sketchier out there for a prop, but it's also not the worst lead that we have. Let's see, do we have a line on Siwoo? I doubt it, right? He's probably not posted over here on one of these sites. So they do have Tom Kim posted. They do have Straka posted at 70.5. Let's see. Do they have Siwoo Kim? Probably not, huh? What are we going to do to get there and have to get a Siwoo line, huh? So this is tough for me. Maybe you just go out there and you play the under on Hovland with the under on Cantlay, and then you go out there and who was the other guy? Yeah, I took an over here in Tommy Fleetwood. Maybe you just make this the slip that you go with. So for now, I'm going to leave it at that. I'll probably add something here the next hour or so to go out there and play with Patrick Cantlay. But if you're looking for a plus EV prop, just to remind you guys, if you're maybe just joining the live stream, I mean, Cantlay is minus 180 under, right? Hovland is minus 185 towards the under for his odds. You're just not going to find that very often in terms of prop value. So that's what we're going to take for that. I'm going to bring up pick 6 real quick, and we'll do that before we hop on out of here. So let's bring up pick 6. Let's go through their board. So they're usually pretty wacky with the pricing over here. So I'm imagining that we can find some sort of value. So if we take a look at birdies are better, 4.5 for pretty much everyone, it looks like. So they also have guys like Sanjay at 4.5. They've got Day up there as well, potential fades that we can look at. 3.5, a lot of your mid to lower tier guys. You also have guys like Hovland that they posted at 3.5 birdies. So I know we took like an under at 4.5, but at 3.5 birdies, like you'd have to lean over on some of these top tier scores, right? So I would say that Hovland would be one of those players. Same thing with the Sahith Theegala. Heck, there's a lot of guys. Like I know we have an over on Fleetwood there. Obviously, we have an over on Tony Finau, but there's a lot of guys that you could take for an over at 3.5. Like Wyndham Clark is probably my favorite out of all of them. So for the sake of this slip, I'm going to take Wyndham as the prop that we're taking for that. You know what? Let's not fade Cantlay. Let's leave that one to the side. And let's not mix match our exposure. Let's just take his over at 3.5 on pick 6 because, you know, I know the line was juiced way under minus 180, but he should probably be at 4 birdies, right? That's probably his efficient projection out there for either site. And because he's going off early, because he's a guy I'm taking in DFS, let's take him for an over out there on birdies. So let's put those 2 in there, and then let's mix in a few fades for some of those PM starters. So let's put Sanjay for fade. We could go with Jason Day again for a fade as well. Let's look at strokes. So there's probably some lines here that we can take a look at. So 70.5 for a slapdick is what I'm looking to fade. So Lee Hodges, right, might fit that kind of description. Let's see what else we've got. Putnam, actually, take that back. We have even better slapdicks that we can fade down here. So, and at 69.5, we even have some guys. I mean, look at this. 68.5 for Sanjay. Yeah, that's pretty wild. They have to shoot -3 to cover. What are their props? He's at 70 strokes, right? Over here on Prize Picks. What is Sanjay at? Sanjay is at 70 strokes too. Yeah, pick 6 has some wild ass lines. So we're gonna take the over on strokes there. We're gonna take the over on strokes for Sanjay M. We're gonna find a few more fades here too. So 69.5, those are all pretty efficient. We could fade Putnam. That was somebody I was looking at before. We could fade Hodges if we wanted to. To go out there and make this an actual slip, though, we're going to need overs and unders. So let's try and find an under on birdies to round this out. So we've already taken a prop for Jason Day and Sanjay. If we wanted to just keep it at a 4-man, which I think would be pretty reasonable, maybe you take Jason Day out and then you take his under on birdies. Under on birdies to make this a slip. These would be the top 4 leans that I'd be going with. So overs on 3.5 birdies on 2 AM starters that are elite tier birdie makers, right? Top 20 birdie makers on the PGA Tour. And over on Sanjay, who's at 70 strokes in Prize Picks. It's an entire 1.5 difference. And then Jason Day, because we need an under, I took him for under at 4.5 birdies, which is already a prop that we'd be looking at to begin with. So, yeah, I feel pretty good about this pick 6 board, right? Obviously, that doesn't mean that we're 100% going to hit, but these props are all value compared to the other sites that we have, and they make sense from the narrative perspective, right? 2 overs on the early guys with better wind conditions, right? Better receptiveness of greens, and then right fades on the guys that are starting a little bit later on. So I like that. I like that it fits what we're looking at for the DFS side too. You've already got a few slips over there for Underdog that we've entered. You've got that slip, those 3 or 4 props that we're looking at Prize Picks. should be good to go at this stage. So I'm going to go ahead, end the live stream at that point. We'll go over any last second questions. But that's all I've got out there for moving day. Best of luck with all your lineups, any PGA DFS slips, any prop slips that you're entering on any of those websites, and go out there and make your boy proud. Best of luck in those contests. Come back for the round 4 stream. And if you haven't already entered that giveaway for the Patreon page, go ahead and give me your top fantasy score out there for moving day. Again, if you can guess that score, you will win that free month of the Patreon. Only caveat, if you're just winning us, is that it can't be somebody that was already taken. So if you're watching this on replay, you're watching this live, all the same rules apply. Go out there, claim your player, and best of luck out there for tomorrow. Let's see, any questions? Why does it not show Rory for strokes? That's a good question, right? He wasn't showing up, huh? Yeah, I don't know, man. That is a really good question. He's not showing up at all for me for strokes. Just to circle back to that, I'll show you. We didn't just overlook it. He's not even there at 68.5 strokes. I don't know, man. That's a good question. Let's refresh this. Maybe he got reposted after the fact. Nope. I've got Cantlay at 60. No, he's at 60. Yeah, there he is. Now he showed up. I don't know. That was strange, huh? Yeah, he's there at 67.5 now. He wasn't before. Take it up with the pick 6 gods. They definitely know. But that's all I've got, guys. I appreciate your support on the channel. Smash the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe so you don't miss that round 4 live stream. And I'll see you guys tomorrow night for all of that.